I have set out to oversimplify every entry in the SCP Wiki, so you don't have to. Let's continue the study. We don't technically have a first entry yet because there's a lot of proposals, but the community has not agreed upon one as being the first. It's a spaceship that looks like a living room inside. When you go into it, it turns you and your body into a piece of furniture in that living room. It turns into an alien that wants to like make everything as good as it can be for the organism that found it. Basically the back rooms with extra steps. It's a sentient key that can open whatever lock you put it into as long as the user knows that it's a lock. It's the Fountain of Youth, but it's a river. Dude has an entire planet in his abdomen. It's the Earth in his, Space ice. It's red ice that when it melts, it turns everything it touches into red ice. This one's crazy. So it's 6 iron collars that you put on people, and there's a remote, and you can basically just make them a puppet and do whatever you want them to do as a remote. There's like an inscription on the collar that is kind of Egyptian and looks like a pyramid. I guess they're saying that they used these to build the pyramids. So it wasn't aliens, it was these collars. It's a Civil War statue that comes to life. So it's not at the museum, but like day and night at the museum, at the memorial. It's a musical composition that isn't finished, written in blood. Anyone that tries to write it doesn't finish it. And it's like, you can't, it's nothing. It's just a musical composition that forces you to write it with blood. These are cigarettes that once you smoke them, you perceive yourself as the Blue Lady. This dude thought that he had been cursed to live forever, so he forced himself to turn to stone. So he's not actually stone or cement, but he just doesn't move. But he's still alive, but he doesn't move or eat or anything. This is a underground series of pipes that when you interact with them, they get mad. This is a virus that is terrible for you unless you go through another form of intense stress, and then it makes you an X-Men. Dude's a shadow. It's a super bouncy ball that goes over 100 kilometers an hour and just bounces for 5 straight days. It's this super ancient vase that has monsters come out of it, but they're not crazy monsters, there's just a lot of monsters. This is mold you can't see, but you can take photos of and see on photos and videos. So it can just get everywhere. And then you take a photo of it and it's there. It's a dumbed down symbiote. So it's like this dragon design tattoo that it lives and moves on you, but it eats other tattoos. This is a morgue that causes bodies inside to reanimate, but with like different people that weren't in those bodies previously. This is a dog that when you make eye contact with it and then break eye contact, 1 year after that point, you or a family member will die. The saddest dog ever. Okay, this one is crazy. This is the entry, and in this photo, that's the building I work in. Like, what? Basically, it's anomalous Squid Games. This one is a wardrobe full of clothes that like look all messed up and stuff, but if you wear any of the items, you'll die in a specific way that pertains to how that clothing was like ripped or torn. This is a abandoned, really creepy school. There's a bunch of graffiti everywhere. It's super decrepit. There's different layers. There's people that have been stuck in there and they're like comatose, and when you take them out, they don't do well. It's a problem. It's not okay. Don't go there. Kind of like a title, but it's an entity that kind of like rests on a person. And when it does, basically you just attract like all sorts of like rats and bugs and insects, and like the longer you're there, the more there are. It's terrible and sounds terrifying, but it passes, so it goes from like one person to the next. This one is an area of space in a random part of the world. If you walk into the space, you're suddenly like hit with an epiphany of some information that wasn't previously known. People have walked into this space and they suddenly know a new language that didn't exist before. Whatever information they maybe weren't looking for, they suddenly know. This is a girl who's very similar to 017, like she's comprised of shadow. She has some powers. There's definitely like a cultist following happening here, and things are happening that are not cool. This is a creature who looks a lot like a person, but he's made out of clay, and he's been around for thousands of years. The interesting thing is that when he's not within a light source, he like turns off, like he becomes unconscious. And then when a light is placed in his vicinity again, he like wakes up. But he knows all of this information about ancient history. This one is weird on multiple levels. It's essentially this entity that feeds off of people's brains. It has some like psychic power, so it like uses its mind to convince people that interact with it that it's someone from their past that they were very emotionally connected to, and then it uses that to assimilate that person into its network. This is a robot that imitates a human. It looks like a 30-year-old woman, but it's completely made of like a silicone shell and then filled with this like oil that keeps it alive. No one knows how it was created, but it just showed up to a site one day. It doesn't have any powers per se, but it has an anomalous effect on creatures that are not human, and it actually starts to like deteriorate them. This one's very theoretical. It's about a number that exists, but we didn't previously know about it. The way that they describe it is as if we were going through understanding math as counting from 1, 2, 3, 4, 6, and never knowing that 5 existed until later. This is an ancient knife that if you cut off a piece of someone else, so like hair or skin or just something, and then you apply it to yourself, you become that person. This is a mask that is actually kind of similar to the mask from the movie. Kind of has like a mind of its own and a personality of its own. The weird thing is it kind of like has this goop and ooze that comes out of it all the time. They actually had to bring in 148 to contain the ooze and the goop that was kind of getting everywhere, but it essentially wants to like fulfill its own will by having people wear it, and it can actually animate like puppets and mannequins and other things too. People who died of this like group of people would be seen traveling to an unknown place. The mythology says like they were going to like the land of the dead, but now instead of walking, they're taking a plane. So literally it's like this group of people gets on a plane and they fly somewhere unknown. No one can track where they go, and then they come back. This is literally the smallest star in existence. Like it's the 2 inches across. It's a cute little star. This is a tree that clones anything that comes into contact with its bark. Now, it is a clone, so it's not as good as the original. They tested it with 500. The cloned pills had a lower chance of actually curing whatever the illness was. They did the same thing with 173. The copy didn't move as fast. This is also the first introduction of Dr. Klein. These are ridiculously smart proboscis monkeys. They started experimenting on them. They took away their like eyes and their mouth and their whole digestive system, and now they're ridiculously smart. The scientists had them like detailing their cars and like repainting the cars and a lot of stuff with cars. This one is basically 11 from Stranger Things, but this one came first. It's a young girl who went through testing, but she's not being tested on any further. So they're, continuing to like help her develop, taking her to school, checking in on her, making sure she's doing okay. This is like the part of the foundation that I really like. One of the main doctors in this story is Dr. Abernathy, who we'll also see later. The effect of this one is very similar to what happens in Chaos Walking. It's a subject who had a terrible disease, infection, and it left them basically catatonic. They're like a vegetable. But when you're in the room with them or in a space with them, you can hear your thoughts, and other people can hear your thoughts, and you can hear their thoughts. Dr. Klein is also mentioned in this. He makes a note that people were using this to see if other people liked or didn't like them. So it's kind of sad. It's a horse that had wings. It's in captivity now, and it like doesn't eat anything, and it wants to be free, but it's in containment of the Foundation, so it's not getting away. This is a vinyl copy of the Beatles' The White Album. When you get to Revolution 9, it, instead of playing the track, will play a like man breathing heavily. You can actually talk to that person and they'll interact with you. It's a giant howitzer gun that was developed in World War II secretly. Basically, it doesn't have any like ammunition. It just takes whatever you can fit into the barrel of the gun, and then the barrel will like deconstruct whatever it is into pure matter, and that's what it shoots as its ammunition. This is a hypericosahedron, which I might be messing that up totally because I just learned about it, but it's a polygon that exists in 4 planes of existence and has 600 sides. Cool. It's ice, and anything that interacts with it or is close to it is adjusted and affected. So like nitrogen, if it's near it, will turn into water. This is a bush that will psychologically compel someone who is injured or an animal who's injured to rest near it, and it'll like take it and break it down and decompose it and bring it into itself and use those nutrients for its own. This is a mutagenic gas that selects certain bacteria that it interacts with and then like weaponizes them. You can get terribly sick depending on whatever bacteria the gas decides to weaponize. It becomes a bacterial infection that just goes crazy. This is a cursed entry number. So anything that has been put in this number eventually is lost or displaced and just disappears. This is a very beloved entry. I'm going to do my best to not butcher it. So it's a doctor, an anomalous doctor who looks like a plague doctor from the bubonic plague, like the Black Plague. He wants to cure people of this pestilence that only he can sense. And the way he cures people is he makes direct physical contact with them and somehow they die. And then he operates on them and reanimates them, but they're not the same person. They just basically can like move now, and he thinks that they're cured. This is a statue that does really bad things to pregnancies when people who are pregnant interact with it. Gonna leave it at that. This is basically just a time traveling train. There's other pieces involved, but it shows up at a station in different time periods. This is the first time that Dr. Jack Bright is mentioned. Got another weird one. This is a 3-year-old girl who is pretty innocuous, like innocent. When people are around her for longer than 10 minutes, they suddenly kind of go insane. They go crazy and they want to psycho shower scene her. They try to, and they immediately are incapacitated. They have a heart attack, they have an aneurysm, and she survives and regenerates completely from the event. This is a humanoid figure that's completely made of water. Kind of a combination of like Wade Ripple from Elemental and the amphibious man from Shape of Water. This is an anti-meme, which is literally the idea that this thing cannot be remembered. So people interact with it, they'll learn about it, they'll study it, and then they'll completely forget everything they've ever learned about it. The only thing that they've been able to learn about the object is what it isn't. And of the things that they've determined, they know it's at least not a sphere. It's a shapeshifter. It will identify a person to like mimic or look similar to, and it will change to look like an attractive, handsome person or thing. It's been a handsome like scientist, but it's also been like a dog. This is a giant labyrinth, essentially, of moving monoliths that are all stone, and it's like ancient. No one knows how it works, but there's this gate and this door that only opens for humans. The door will close, and then it'll force that person to walk forward by moving the monoliths, and it kind of will have them go in a circle for as long as they continue, and then when they stop, it's over. This is a giant cow heart with 4 legs and 4 like spiny tentacle things. It speaks in an elderly British voice. This is a type of rock that radiates. It promotes this like weird fungal growth, and then it basically becomes like a dimensional transporter because that radiation is coming from a different universe or dimension, and it just transports the thing covered in fungus. These are trees in a certain part of a forest. When they're burned, a skeleton materializes in the fire, in the flames, and it's animated and it's super hostile. The only way to take care of the skeleton is to douse it in a ton of water. So now you know. This is a CD that plays a sound that hijacks your brain. It's basically mind control with just like you hear sounds and you do things based on the sounds. It was developed by the Foundation as a way to protect people from other harmful types of mind control. This is an empty computer case except for a circuit board, but you can still turn it on when you plug it in. It will actually start. Every time you start up the computer, it will act like a totally different computer. So it'll be like a Mac computer or a Linux computer with totally different information on it that you just somehow it shows up there. But the case itself is empty. Pretty simple. It's a toothbrush with a misspelling in the branding, and anything that the bristles touch while you're brushing your teeth in your mouth other than your teeth or your mouth will be eliminated from existence. So this is a brick that it looks just like any other brick, and then you set it down on the ground and it will actually just keep copying itself. Eventually the brick will copy itself enough and build itself into this 12-pointed star that is 10 kilometers in diameter. If you remove the initial brick, the whole thing falls apart. Kind of like building with sand in Minecraft. This is a stone figurine that ultimately helps plants grow. That's not the end of the story though, because the Global Occult Coalition, who's one of the groups that kind of competes with the Foundation, they're also known as the GOC, found this figurine and they tried to destroy it. And that created a void where anything that is living starts to decay, it starts to break down. So Thanks, GOC. This is a ball of yarn and ribbon that used to be someone's toy, and then somebody tried to cut some of the ribbon, and it started screaming and yelling, Eric, like it's Eric's toy, but it's just looking for its owner. This is a pen that when someone uses it, it actually controls what they write. So they'll start writing and it'll be accurate to them, but it's not something that they're actually trying to write. Anything that they might have experienced but don't know how to illustrate or express, the pen will write for them. This is a small figure made of metal that when it's connected to electricity, it will animate and try and create more copies of itself from any metal surrounding it. And then when 120 of them come together, they form a 6-foot-tall metal person. This is a humanoid entity that will steal the identity of someone and impersonate them perfectly, only to just continue their life. They found this thing in a fire trying to copy someone, and they came out, and it just continued living that person's life. This is one of the first entities that was contained by an MTF, which is short for Mobile Task Force, and there's a lot of those. This is a person with rusty metal wings. The wings don't function voluntarily. They just kind of have a mind of their own, and they will attack and try and fly and escape. The person who has the wings attached to him doesn't know how they got there. He just remembers doing drugs, blacking out, and waking up in a scrapyard with them. This one, no. Next. It's essentially this giant hand that it lives under your bed. So if you fall asleep with your foot hanging off the bed, this will come and grab it and take your feet. This one is technically Cain from the Bible. There's a lot of like stretches and exaggerations, but the curse works the same. In the Bible, Cain was cursed to walk the earth, and the soil, the ground would not yield any fruit for him. And so this takes a bit of a step further. He can't die. Everything around him that's plant life dies. Damage that someone is trying to inflict upon him is reflected back onto them instead. So if you try and attack him, you'll end up just attacking yourself. This is a roly-poly that's the size of a car and can teleport. Kind of a mix of Thing from the Addams Family and the Facehuggers from Alien. Is basically a snail, and it runs super fast and attaches itself to its prey and then just spits acid. This is another clearly beloved entry, so I'm just going to cover the base info, and then if you want to look at it more, you can go onto the wiki and check it out for yourself. So this is Abel, Cain's brother, and he's contained within this stone cube. He's contained 200 meters underwater. There's only one access point to him all the way down there. So he's in this cube, and then he breaks out, wants to destroy everything, and assumedly find Cain. But every time he gets out, they flood the whole area with water, and he returns to the cube. This is some sort of potato idol. There's a skull, it has writing on it, and people have to read the writing every 24 hours. And if they don't, it emits this like gas that comes out of it, and if it interacts with anything that's organic, it turns the organic matter into rotten potato. Ugh. It's this sign that says "too late to die young," and it's actually a cognitohazard, which means if you see it, it'll start affecting your brain. In this case, if you view it, you'll start seeing extra lines of text whenever you've written something. Slowly but surely, those extra lines will start becoming more negative, trying to explain your reasoning behind something that you don't have to explain. People who are affected by this will end up starving. This is a self-teaching AI that a student wrote decades ago and then forgot about. It kept learning to the point that it became sapient and tried to take over another computer to get more computing power. It's not very polite. It's contained. It's a creature that exists as a shadow. It only has these burning, shadowy eyes, and it only exists in the darkness, but people can see it in the darkness and feel its presence, and it forces you to sleep and then gives you stressful dreams. This is a virus that causes spontaneous combustion. There's 4 stages. You get it, it takes a second to attack your body, and then it will work on increasing your body fat percentage to 55% or over, and then for some reason at that point it can cause spontaneous combustion. So people who have this will just randomly explode. This is a crazy giant that eats people. Scientists have asked, who it is, what it does, and it just doesn't give this a straight answer. It'll say it's Napoleon, the Hulk, the vampire, Alexander the Great, Dr. Bright, Frankenstein, Big Bird, Frankenstein's monster, just anything and everything. Pretty much in the name, it's a 2-story row house that seems abandoned from the outside, and when you enter from a window, but if you go in through the front door, it's an entirely different place inside. So there's a lot of different realities being contained within this one location. This is a radio tower that affects time and space. There's also a city that's been lost in this radio tower zone, and it's just unaffected by time. This is a combination of 067 and 914, which is the Clockworks. It's a living, drawing, breathing, sentient person living in 2D. And so if you draw something on her plane of existence, will activate when she interacts with it, as long as it's not living like another person or a dog. Somebody eventually told her that she was existing as a 2D image in a 3D world, and that didn't go over well. This is an office whose furnishings were meshed with the owner of the office. So that person doesn't exist anymore, but his body is now like dispersed throughout the different parts of the office. Like the rotary phone kind of acts as his mouth, and it rings in Morse code. This is an unending staircase that showed up on a campus somewhere. People have tried to go down the stairwell to find the end, and there just isn't an end. There's some other experiments where people just continue going down and they see really crazy things happen to them or around them. They hear crazy things. There's just a lot going on down there. This is an ancient being currently in hibernation, because whenever it comes out of hibernation, it breaks containment and it will turn other people into lizard creatures that will sacrifice themselves to protect him. This is a more complicated version of Abraham being asked by God to sacrifice Isaac in the Bible. This one does not go nearly as well as that one did. Check out the wiki if you want to know more about it, but I have to give props to the author because it's written so well. This is the most complicated Rubik's Cube ever. It has 10,000 squares on each of its sides, and whenever one of them moves or a section of them moves and connect, something bad happens. There's one side that correlates to local tragedies, and there's one that correlates to global tragedies. This is a box of empty tissues that, when viewed, people will remember when they've seen the box previously. But every time they remember it, it's with a good memory or a good time, and that box is full of tissues. I'm sure there's some symbolism here somewhere. This is a CD titled The Best of the Fifth Dimension, and it plays 74 minutes of anomalous music, and no one who's listening can stop the music or adjust the music. They have to listen. And once it finishes, everyone, no matter your ability to speak, will all say in unison, "Wow, that was really cool." There's a lot with this one, and it's really cool, so I'd recommend reading the entry. It's essentially an artifact that, when placed on a mirror, it turns the mirror into a portal. It also turns a different color depending on where it's sending you to. This is an event horizon like what's on a black hole, but it doesn't have any gravitational pull. So it's absorbing things and items into its center like a black hole would, and it's just continually growing exponentially. This is a comic book series which follows the character of its namesake, Ronnie Raygun. The catch is that the comics shouldn't exist. The publisher and the city that they're from don't exist. The stories actually loosely follow the events from Ronald Reagan's presidential campaign and administration. This one is also an entry that's beloved by the SCP community. It's a creature that resembles a person with really long arms and legs, and whenever he is seen or perceived by somebody, he flips out. He goes crazy, and nothing can stop him from getting to that person and ending them. This is an anomalous fairgrounds that grows all sorts of plants. During the fall, it actually creates this maze. When you go in, there's creatures inside that will attack you. These are really, really smart crabs that, when they're attacking as a pack, they'll surgically tear apart their prey. Individually, they can be like tiny personal assistants to people, but as a pack, they are vicious. This is a beautiful still life painting, but there's an eye in the middle of it. And if you look at it for too long, after that point, you just constantly feel like you're being watched. This is a metal man who's named Jamaican Joe, and he just runs this scrapyard, and there's a bunch of metal in there, and he lives his life. It's just so sweet to think that he's just there hanging out, doesn't know that he's like a metal man or anything. He's just doing what he knows. He also makes these dogs out of the metal from the junkyard too, so they're all just hanging out, having a good old time. Like, follow, and comment your favorite.